This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Unpainted digital miniatures?
Chris Perkins is retiring from Wizards of the Coast.
You definitely don't last 28 years in this industry.
There's some world economics going on at the moment, folks.
This is an incredibly complicated system that you must operate on with a scalpel and not a chainsaw.
See, I use sledgehammer.
Sorry, I'm a serious economist. Go on,
It's an
James.
honor to be part of the number one podcast. It really is.
You hear that, FCC? That was comedy.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the number one tabletop RPG and economics podcast in all the realms. That's right. When you want to know what's going on with the world, global geopolitics, you should not be listening to us, but we're going to give it a crack anyway because that's the spirit of role-playing. My name's Ben Byrne. I am role-playing as an economist today, and I am joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and because we actually wanted someone who did journalism this week in some capacity, Teos. Welcome back to the Eldritch Lorecast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with my fellow journalism scholars.
Let us start with a question that I have, honestly, for the three of you, which is, what the fudge is an Arby's, and why do their D&D dice keep selling out? Is Arby's that popular?
Yes.
Arby's
Yes.
is the number one roast beef sandwich place in all the realms. Don't
Yes.
you know?
It's a close
Delicious.
It deploys horsey sauce liberally upon meat products and wrapped in bread. Who could say no to that?
What's
They
horsey sauce?
Have
It's
the
their
meat. It's
horseradish
horseradish
sauce.
and mayonnaise.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, if you grow up in small town America, as I did for part of my life after I left South America, which you can imagine what that was like. But I found myself in this tiny town, and when they got an Arby's, the celebration that took off is unimaginable. This was such a meaningful moment. Almost as good as when they got the Taco Bell right before that. And it's one of those markers of that you've made it in your life. So I think it's only natural, Ben, that when dice with little hats came in, I tried to buy some and I failed twice. And now I've been denied that because they're metal and I don't want them anymore.
Now,
But they
You're
sold
not
out
a-
anyway.
are
not a
these
metal dice
Arby's
fan?
dice real? I thought they were an April Fool's gag.
No, all of them have been real.
So, for folks who don't know what we're talking about, most recently, the dice maker Norse Foundry has partnered with Arby's to make a red set of metallic dice with the Arby's logo as the highest result on each dice. If they didn't have Arby's logos, which I have no personal connection to, they actually look kind of sick. I'm not going to lie.
I think also Arby's at one point was owned by the same company that owned Wendy's. And
Right.
Wendy's did its own RPG. So obviously there's some RPG connection within that food services conglomerate. But really what Arby's is best at is the Twitter nihilist Arby's. If you have not read Nihilist Arby's,
No.
do yourself a favor and you will get things like, this Thanksgiving it's time to pretend that being trapped in this nightmare prison of sentience, toil, pain, and fear is something to celebrate. Be thankful this life is short and that eternal black nothingness comes soon for all of us. For until then, we are but slaves. Enjoy Arby's.
That's the Arby's and Grim Hollow crossover that we were.
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm on board. That sounds like a D&D adventure waiting to happen. So these were preceded, as Teos, I think, was saying a moment ago, an original set of Arby's dice that were clear resin with an Arby's hat in the core of them. I believe was an actual partnership between Wizards and Arby's at the time. Initially released in 2021 and then again in 2023. Both times sold out and can only be found today on eBay for between $100 to $200 US.
Wow.
Yeah, the more you know.
Yeah. They're kind of neat looking. I mean, they've got these little goofy Arby's hats, you know, like some kind of Western looking tall hat in there. And I wanted a set, but yeah, like you said, they sold out. And I got a notice. I had said, you know, notify me when they're back in stock. Not fast enough the second time. And then I got the email this time, which was now under Norse Foundry. But yeah, I like the original ones.
Speaking of things we like reporting the news. And the news this week is sad. Chris Perkins is retiring from Wizards of the Coast, officially announced via X and Blue Sky. Chris Perkins said that after 28 years, with D&D's 50th anniversary wrapping up and the revised rulebooks doing gangbusters, this is the perfect fairy tale ending for me. Me, meaning him, meaning Chris Perkins. Yay for Chris Perkins?
Yay for Chris Perkins.
I mean, what a career.
Yeah.
Who can really rival his career? There are a couple, that you could talk about really just year after year, the Steve Jackson types, but other than that, I mean, and especially as somebody who came in as a freelancer, that is a storied run. And what talent he has showcased, right? I mean, I remember reading one of his things that came out not too long ago and just, thinking to myself, yep, I can still get better because these are really great words.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't last 28 years at most jobs. You definitely don't last 28 years in this industry without not only being super talented and dedicated, but being just above and beyond in all those areas. Yeah. To last through all the layoffs and all the addition changes and everything that goes on. So I think that speaks highly of Chris's skills.
Yeah. And Chris he's not a company man in that way, right? Mm-hmm. He started with TSR. He's a D&D man. He loves D&D and he is impervious to edition warring. To have seen his work from second edition through to third, 3.5, his work that's probably some of the best fourth edition stuff that ever came out, his Dungeon Master's Experience column through all of that. And obviously his seminal 5e work. It's like there's no one in this millennium other than maybe Matt Mercer who is synonymous as D&D with him, right? If we look at the 20th century, that's Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, those people. But Chris Perkins is singular in this day and age, and it's the end of an era for him to leave.
Yeah, and he made that transition that not everyone can make from being really good at your job, sitting at your desk, sweating over your keyboard, to having to step in front of a camera, to perform for an audience, to become a spokesperson in a way that you wouldn't have had to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And he did that. So he made it look easy, although I think anyone who knows him knows that it wasn't easy for him to do that. It took work and it took patience. And yeah, he was able to do it while always making the work the most important thing rather than fame being the most important thing.
Well, that's the strange transition, exactly as you were just saying, Shawn, is like celebrity, to my understanding, and I put that in heavy quotation marks because nobody outside the tabletop RPG industry knows who Matt Mercer is, right? But it was not a thing, to my understanding, as much pre kind of 5th edition, right? Like you would have the designers you would know, but a lot of people, like honestly, even knowing like who Justice Armand and Mackenzie de Armas are within the design team is kind of a new thing within the industry that's evolved in the YouTube era, the social media era, to create celebrity out of designers. And then the opposite direction, people coming in, creating YouTube channels and then turning into designers, that way. It feels like Chris Perkins is someone who, from the kind of distant annals of the Annals. I don't want to pronounce that word correctly.
They're both great. One of them's accurate, but they're both great.
The distant past of the industry to be able to make that transition, like modernizing as the industry modernizes, I suppose.
Yeah. This is an interesting thing you bring up because I do think that broad cultural penetration is more common these days.
I'm sorry.
Dante, would you
yeah, we need to keep our G rating. Like,
don't make me pull this podcast over, kids.
Sorry, I'm a serious economist. Go on,
it's an honor to be part of the number one podcast. It really is. This is just.
But I'll stick to my guns. You guys have to keep a straight face when I say it. Broader cultural penetration of D&D designers is much more these days with people like Matt Colville and Mercer and Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford and Mike Merles and all of these people. I think the average like lay player, right? Not necessarily the average person, but the average player the odds of them knowing who these people are is more. The only person comparable back in the 3rd edition era, year 2000, would be, I don't know, Monty Cook, maybe, sort of the celebrity designer.
Sure.
But also, there aren't names on the covers of D&D books anymore, right? You look at your 3rd, even 4th edition books, they've got people's names on the front. Kobold Press still puts names on the front. Third-party publishers sometimes still put names on the front. But D&D is a branded entity now, right? The names are on the inside cover. And so I think some designers, among people who really cared, got something of a cult following in a way that doesn't happen these days as much anymore.
Yeah, there's a great old blog post that used to be on Rob Schwab's original blog, written during the 4th edition era, where he said that there were no real stars in design. And this whole idea, like you're saying, Joey, that when you remove the name from the cover, it sort of doesn't matter, because the only name, he said, the only person who people possibly recognize and that might move a sale is Monty Cook. And that has obviously changed dramatically, right? And it's neat to see, like Shawn said, Chris navigated that changeover as a person who didn't really want to be in front of the camera, but was devoted enough to Dungeons and Dragons and what it could do to do it anyway. And to find a way to enjoy it, right? I mean, he took a break from running AC Inc., for example, right? Because it was not a thing he was super enjoying. And then he came back and did it a little more, but, pacing himself differently with that. And that's just amazing, right? There are so many people who do like the camera, and he did it in spite of not liking it, which is cool.
Chris is on record in some podcast or another saying whenever he would go on stage at PAX to run a live game of Acquisitions Incorporated, he would enter sort of a fugue state where he would emerge backstage again with 4 hours having passed, his clothes drenched in sweat, and having no recollection of the past 4 hours. And I believe it, right? Because he seems cool as a cucumber up there. But like, as someone who's done stuff on stage before, that's how it is sometimes. Especially when you're a more introverted person. And Chris definitely is.
Well, it's interesting hearing you all say that, especially from folks who know him. Like, I've met Chris maybe twice, I think. And once was to do an interview last year at Gen Con with him and Jeremy Crawford. And both of them super friendly, super giving of their time for how busy they were at the convention. But it's just interesting to me hearing these kind of more personal stories of Chris, because from the outside looking in and having met him a handful of times, he's good at it. It seems effortless. I think, as you said before, Teos, he makes it look easy because he is, I think, just kind of photogenic, but it's not photos. It's just like, he was funny when we interviewed him last year. I remember talking about him interviewing and hiring Jeremy Crawford. And then just like, that was a good call. Just having a laugh about it in the moment was really fun. So I will throw out there, interesting timing given Chris's promotion, which was only 5 months ago, to the creative director of Wizards of the Coast. Oh, sorry, no, creative director of Dungeons and Dragons. I should correct myself. 5 months to me doesn't feel like it was a hell of a long time to have any impact on that specific role, especially as what we had the in that time Secret Level come out, but that was probably already like well on its way to completion by the time that Chris was in that role. What do we think?
I mean, this show likes to speculate. I know that, so I will put on my speculation hat.
Catching strays out here.
He started this job in October, and even if he was doing it a little earlier, there's no way a lot got put into motion, right? And so either he was trying to do something to stay involved because he believes in D&D and so on, just couldn't, right? No, I really want to be retired, right? Isn't entirely a possibility. And I think the more that you know Chris, the more you know that he would be really happy just being in his room at home, like a lot of people have said to me, do you think he's about to launch a Kickstarter? No, I do not think so. When he says he wants to like sit back and like be in a chair, like that's what he wants to do. And so it may be that he was trying to keep himself going, and maybe this sounded fun and different. And then he found, well, not enough, or maybe he got into this position hoping it would offer some of the things that he likes. Like he's always talked about wanting to be in film or in TV. Sure. And so maybe he thought this would kind of bring in that kind of creativity. And then he found, well, it actually involves a lot of corporate stuff and barriers and meetings and difficulties. And then he's out. and both of those are perfectly acceptable answers in my mind. And to me, they're the most likely scenarios that I would speculate on, though I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I can corroborate on that. I think an Agatha Christie novel is where Chris Perkins' head is at right now. But you're right, Teos. In his Dungeon Master Experience blog and other 4E era stuff, he talks extensively about how if he had not gotten into D&D, he would have tried at least to become a screenwriter. He likens D&D design to episodes, to serialized TV design, to Star Trek The Next Generation, to stuff like that. Yeah, if he's retired, if he's done working, I think he will be content to, remain married to D&D in one way or another in a purely avocational way from here on out. And I hope he gets it. Because damn, he has had a long and storied career. And if I can move to this topic, I kind of pity the person who needs to fill such big shoes. They've got their work cut out for them.
There are going to be three people that need to fill his shoes.
Yeah,
or more.
Seriously.
He did much more than just design, right?
Yeah.
He did so much. And I can't imagine one person being able to step in and do all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
He also has a clear capability to produce beyond what any mortal human normally does, right? The stories of him going off and generating Curse of Strahd on a weekend, or a spreadsheet of all the D&D Next monsters and their stats, right? Just go home and do that. There are very few people that can do that and are also, like Shawn was saying, able to hold down that job forever, right? They might have that one superpower, but boy, it comes with a lot of negatives, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a point-by system of life. Chris somehow has a lot of max stats. Perhaps some deal with the devil, I don't know. Speculation.
Yeah.
Do we think, speaking of speculation, do we think we'll see Chris pop up again? Maybe Acquisitions Incorporated, or gets brought back to be the DM for some events or anything? Do we think he might keep some involvement there, or he's good, he's done, my watch is over?
Chris is so married to D&D, I can't imagine him, moving on from it entirely. I don't think he'll do a Kickstarter in the way that, say, Mike Merles has. I would be surprised if he came back and guest DM'd Ack Inc. anytime soon, because again, he's not, he doesn't want to be behind the camera too often, or in front of the camera too often. But I think this is the last we've seen of Chris Perkins for a while, honestly.
Yeah, I'd put more money on that than anything else.
Well, wishing him well, wishing him all the best for the future. There's been no, as is probably evident from our speculation, there's been no word on what he's moving on to aside from just being a fan of D&D. So, I hope he enjoys retirement. And speaking of retirement, Sigil was retired a few weeks ago. This is a tiny bit of news. I'm going to be honest, I caught this because Mastering Dungeons talked about it last week. Sigil has released a handful of free miniature packs via email, I believe is how most people learned about this, because I went to the D&D Beyond website and it was not easy to find once again. Those packs include free miniatures, which are a Dwarven armor pack to put Dwarven looking armor on your digital miniature, your digital player character, a mimic, both chest and mimic form, and an animal pack, including a griffin, which is a monstrosity, thank you, unless the rules have changed that. Panthers, two panthers, an axebeak, and a crocodile, which hilariously to me are unpainted miniatures. They're just kind of silver. They're digital. Just
what?
Drag the color slider, surely. They just kind of look brassy.
What?
I thought that was strange.
According to the email, players can return every week to claim a new pack of minis for your Sigil adventures. I'll be honest, I'm not surprised by this. I think they mentioned even when they did the layoffs around Sigil that they're going to continue supporting it and releasing things probably that were already basically completed previously.
I think it will remain available. I think it will be usable by people with a certain level of subscription on D&D Beyond. And if they've already got a bunch of stuff in the can ready to release, they will probably just release it as free, trying to draw more people to use this tool that they've created.
I like Joey's face.
Unpainted digital miniatures? What?
You have to paint them yourself, James.
Yeah, you got to put them into MS Paint.
Brush, and you take an actual brush and you just
Right.
on your screen. You paint them.
Can you imagine you're running a game on the Sigil tabletop with all the whiz bang, all the color, all the like animated spells, and then you drop in an unpainted wolf, like just
It's a copper wolf.
here.
It's a copper.
It's funny
like
because it's
copper dragon, only it's a wolf.
yeah. There you go. I mean, this is maybe ironically the exact problem I would have thought Sigil was trying to solve was the idea of like you don't have to paint your miniatures; they come pre-painted.
Yeah, I don't know. Sigil is strange, and I mean it's a super hard thing to do, right? So I'm not like this is a super hard project to have tried to execute on this, but you can see enough in these kinds of approaches to realize that there was a real disconnect at the management level of how to make this all work. And these are the kind of things that you just wonder, like, it's fine to have, give me your free, chesty mimic. That's fine. See what I did there? But what you really want, if what we want to do is to improve Sigil, you want to go back to the things that make it hard to use, right? How easy is it for me to build something cool? And if it's a lot of work, then I'm just a lot better off doing things in Dwarven Forge and taking a picture of it and sharing that on my VTT, whichever I use, whether it's maps or something else, right? Like, to me, what I found difficult about Sigil at a very basic level is it's not super easy for me to build stuff. Yeah, I can put a bunch of tiles down, but to make something neat, like the pictures they show off, you cannot easily do that.
Sure.
And if there isn't constant content coming out, like I'm not going to get 3D awesome dioramas they're providing, then this is not going to work. And then it'll last as long as they can afford to run the servers for it because it's, not producing any real income.
D&D Online lasted, is it still running? The Eberron-based MMO?
I think so.
Did you know this existed, Ben? Have you ever heard of this? D&D Online.
I feel like I've heard the name before, but go on.
No, there's nothing to say other than in 3rd edition, they came out with a MMORPG called D&D Online that was set in Eberron. And even when it was replaced, even when Neverwinter, the 4th edition MMO set in Neverwinter came out, and which made the transition to 5th edition in terms of storylines, if not in game mechanics, DDO kept on trucking. It's there. I mean, it basically costs the salary of 2 skeleton crew and a server farm for the 30 people who play it. And now Neverwinter has gone the same way. I don't know if those servers are still up. DDO might have outlasted even Neverwinter.
No, it's still up, but they have essentially nobody working on it.
Yeah, skeleton crew.
I shouldn't say nobody. They do create new things, and there are clear partnerships like with Ari Salvatore and things like that. So it's a little better. It's way stronger than the Eberron connection. But yeah, it's a much smaller team at Cryptic that maintains it. And they were, bought out and all that kind of thing. So it's all, it's hard, right? These are hard. And how long will we see it? We'll see it as long as people are still using it. And that's the part that worries me, because if what you want is a lot of people using Sigil, it doesn't come from a free, Owlbear mini. It comes from making it easier to use, I think.
Yes, we shall see with the future of Sigil whether it gets a redemption story or not. Guess we can't delay it any further. To talk about the actual news this week, the word that's on everybody's lips, especially Roman, who brought it up right at the top of the episode in the chat. There's some world economics going on at the moment, folks, with the way that the US government has chosen to enforce tariffs on imports coming in from other nations. We're going to talk a lot about this, talk about how it's affecting the industry in lots of different ways. I did a lot of reading on this yesterday, and ultimately it just boils down to a guttural, nihilistic scream. We did have some folks asking in the Ghostfire Gaming Discord how this affects Ghostfire directly. I just want to talk about that at the top, saying that, currently we're exploring our options on how to best deal with the changing circumstances around tariffs. We're still considering options, especially for our current Kickstarters that are yet to fulfill. We don't have anything to say specifically. Firstly, to say anyone outside the US, this isn't going to affect you. We're not going to subsidize US backers' pledges by taxing or we wouldn't be taxing, but charging more to the people outside the US. For our US backers, our goal currently is absolutely to avoid additional costs, and we're exploring every avenue that we can to avoid that. So know that is our goal, to avoid those. We just can't be certain yet that is a financial or mathematical possibility. So we don't want to make any definitive statements to say one way or the other, including, obviously, Enchanting Emporiums, Monsters of Drakkenheim, and Grim Hollow Transformed being the 3 Kickstarters that are currently kind of up in the air around this. So I just want to get that out of the way at the top, because anything we say kind of from this point is not necessarily on behalf of Ghostfire. Mm-hmm. To lay down some, what I believe are facts first, just to lay some groundwork, I know everybody is probably familiar with this information. Please, someone jump in and correct me if I get any of this wrong. On April 2nd, US President Donald Trump announced a total of 54% tariffs on all goods manufactured in China and imported into the US. These tariffs are intended to take effect on April 9th, which is couple of days away at this point, about 2 days away US time. Just, again, I'm sure everybody's been well educated on this by this point, but just to reaffirm, a tariff is a tax paid by the importer of the goods and therefore affects game publishers producing and selling their products in the US market. The person who is bringing it into the country, usually this will be in most cases, especially with US companies, the game company themselves are the ones who will need to pay the tariff to get their books into the country, not the Chinese manufacturer. Tariffs are imposed based on country a product is manufactured in, not from where it came from immediately following the US. So there were a couple of suggestions for Ghostfire books in particular. We manufacture a lot of things over in China. Similarly to the US, Australia doesn't have a big manufacturing industry around things like plastics and we might have printing, I'm not entirely sure. But the fact is, you can't just ship something to another country, say Australia, hypothetically, and then ship it to the US for a lower tariff, because it doesn't matter where it's come from. What matters is where the object is manufactured. How this is affecting tabletop games, particularly board games, but also this could affect particularly Kickstarter RPGs, which have a high number of different components, including dice, miniatures, meeples, tokens, cardboard tokens, plastic tokens, acrylic tokens, wooden tokens, you name it, it's in a board game somewhere. Most of those are manufactured either in China or in the EU somewhere. Many of those items aren't able to be produced in the US directly due to a skills or machines shortage there. It just doesn't exist. Arguably, a tariff is intended to stimulate industry within the country that's imposing the tariff, so that, they could start manufacturing their own miniatures, but that's not going to work for current game companies, because it can take months, if not years, to build up that sort of industry. And very often, you're importing the tools and equipment and things required to be able to spin up that industry in the first place. So if it's a blanket tariff on everything as opposed to targeted tariffs, this means that it's even more difficult to set up that industry internally.
There are examples of games publishing that happens in the US, right? For example, a big one, all the 5e books past a certain point have been published in the USA. You can see it on their credits page, and that includes the current Wizards books. However, another effect of these tariffs, right? It's not that there's no industrial production infrastructure in America. It's that it's very limited and it's very expensive, because we live in a post-industrial nation and we have high labor costs, as opposed to countries that are more attractive to sweatshop owners, which have very low labor costs, right? And so if you want to avoid a tariff, if you're a manufacturer, you want to avoid a tariff by producing within the US, well, this is basic supply and demand. There's very high supply for people who want to avoid tariffs, or very high demand, I mean to say, and low manufacturing supply. And that likewise drives up certain costs. And more insidiously, it results in inflated costs of material. You may think that just because books are exempt from the tariffs, right? That's part of the tariff, right? Books and printed material, someone in the chat is putting the direct line in there, they are exempt. But this kind of economic instability affects the price of material. And so things will happen in ways that you can't begin to expect just by the simple facts. You need to think about all the knock-on effects and ways in which this is an incredibly complicated system that you must operate on with a scalpel and not a chainsaw.
See, I use sledgehammer instead of chainsaw, but we're on the exact same page.
I think it's Roman, but maybe there's a bit of a wider conversation going in there about how books are exempt from tariffs currently. There was a Rascal article And there's many articles about this, FYI. But a Rascal article came out literally, I think, 5 hours before we're recording this. I had a quick read of it, talking to various RPG publishers, talking about how books may be exempt from, and look, I don't know enough about import codes or those sort of things. We do have people at Ghostfire who do know more about this stuff. Maybe we should have had them host this episode.
Huh.
From reading the Rascal article, my understanding is two things. First of all, if you can get an RPG book in, that's great. That's good if they're not going to be taxed or tariffed. And maybe that does help quite a lot of RPG companies. It does get squirrely when you're talking about, as I mentioned earlier, Kickstarter RPGs that are trying to, within a box, import dice, miniatures, fabric maps, all those sort of things. That may not be exempt. And on top of that, as the Rascal article was talking about, what constitutes a book can also be a little bit squirrely in terms of what tax code it would come under or tariff code it would come under, because is a Dungeon Master screen a book? Some would argue it is book-like. It is made of cardboard and paper, and it is about the size and shape of a book, especially when it's folded up. But nobody is going to know until literally they're trying to pull it off a boat in a port in the US somewhere, whether a tariff is going to be applied to it or not.
And that's the kind of thing that 1 week could be flagged a certain way and the next another, right? Because that does happen at ports of shipping, that someone decides to enforce a tariff a certain way and the next time they don't. And even if you eventually get clearance, right, that's timing, that's cost. We've already seen drive-through their printer up prices way before these tariffs, just because tariffs are being spoken of, right? And so there can be a lot of cases where prices will escalate even if there is a book exemption. The other thing that's important to note about these things, it is on the price of the manufactured cost rather than the sticker price, right? So it's not that it's a $50 book. And so it's not on the 50, it's on whatever you paid that printer to actually make that book for you. But it's still, this is a rough business, right? For all role-playing game companies are generally very narrow profit, and any particular, even crowdfunding can be a really slim affair that might not go the way you want it to. And this makes it all far, far harder.
There was a really good explanation, a very good layman's explanation. And I actually couldn't find where I saw this when I went digging back in. So I apologize. Because like I said, I read about 4 or 5 articles on this issue just yesterday. But yeah, let's say a book is $50 at sale from your local game retailer in the US, and we're going to assume that I'm saying US dollars for all our Australian listeners. That book might cost $5 to print as an individual book. And then that book gets sold for $10 to the distributor or importer who pulls it into the country. And then that's sold from the importer to the game store for however much money. Now, if the import tax, if the tariff is on the manufactured cost and it goes up to, and again, I'm just using banana maths here, but like $7.50, but then the importer is like, well, I don't want to pay more than that. I only want to pay you $10 for the book. Then the person who manufactured the book, who produced the book, is making $2.50 less every book. That's just accounting for the manufacturing cost of the book. That's not accounting for their wages, staff costs, marketing, everything else that they have to pay for to function as a company. That $5 that they make when they sell it to the importer or the distributor is accounting for, so that those thin margins that RPG and tabletop board game companies function on, once they start to narrow, it becomes very, very difficult to do any of the other functions that you need to do to survive as a company.
Yeah, one other thing that we're not sure of, right, is you could have, right now these are the reciprocal to the reciprocal tax tariffs, but we could have another reciprocal round where suddenly, you find that book that you sold to somebody that needs to go to the EU, and you're an American company that's selling it. Well, now you might have another tariff going in that way, because it may not play by the same rules that these tariffs play, right? It may not be exempt as a book, or it may not be because it wasn't manufactured. It could just be, I'm sorry, you're bringing something in and it's of this kind, you just don't know. And that uncertainty is rough, right? I can think of an example where you could maybe argue that this was okay, which was started in the previous administration with saying that electric cars received credits only if it was the components, a certain percentage of the components and types of components were created in the US. And it was to stimulate American savvy and so on. And the result has been mixed, but it has resulted in car companies investing in creating American car companies or companies that sell in America, investing in that because it's a very specific thing and they can generally count on this will be here for a long time. So it's worth working on electric cars because we can see that this is where the US is heading, so we can bank on that. Nobody is thinking they can bank on this. And that's a big part of it, is that you don't know whether tomorrow all of this will be reversed or next year, or it'll get worse, or it's completely unpredictable. And that lack of stability is, I think, what will prevent anybody from doing the reason you might come up with this program, which is to stimulate something, right? Like book production across the US. I wouldn't invest in it. And I don't know that a lot of people would, because you just don't know. And there was somebody in a Forbes article today that was saying that they have received estimates for the type of board games they want to create in the US that are 400% higher in cost than through China. So it doesn't matter that the tariff is plus 54%. It is still cheaper than printing in the US. And nobody's going to be, or not enough of a change can come off of that to take it away. So really all you've just done is reduce profit for everybody, right? And possibly cause a recession type situation in a number of ways, including that you could see a lot of board game companies go, I'm out, or I can only make this kind of game. Right?
I want to jump in here and say, it's a climate of economic fear and uncertainty that's exemplified by this story. Stefan Pokorny, one of the main guys over at Dwarven Forge, released a statement on Facebook saying, "We're finished. We're done. These tariffs make it impossible to do business. It's the end of Dwarven Forge." And not too much later, he recanted that statement when one of his business partners sat him down and said, "Hey, don't freak out, man. We can figure out a way to make it through this. Don't say stuff like that." But people say stuff like that because it's getting the door slammed in your face. And you can see from the recession indicators, the stock market downturn, stuff like that, that what causes a market slump in many ways is people freaking out and going on a bank run and pulling all their money out, right? The iconic image of the Great Depression is a bank run, and all of a sudden there's no liquid capital to give to people, and that causes economic crisis. That's just a result of chaos at the executive level. People don't know what to expect. A healthy world economy is kind of boring, right? It doesn't make great TV ratings, but it's kind of boring, but it's stable.
If the manufacturing costs of a book are inflated, or any product, tabletop product, are inflated because you're trying to manufacture in the US or any other different country, you're suddenly forced to pay tariffs. The only other end of the maths that you can do there is increase prices on consumers, which is not ideal. Partly because, obviously, especially for people who are creators, they just want to get their products into people's hands, right? They do it for a living. They love to get paid for their work, obviously, but they want to get their work into creators' hands. So they don't want to charge more than they necessarily have to. But the other side is, if prices are increasing on board games, whilst prices are increasing on literally everything else, I think, as James was just saying, discretional spending goes down. Board games or luxury items are the first things that people have to nix off their shopping list if they're uncertain or if they don't have as much money to spend. So even if you could raise prices, that means you're making less sales because people have less discretionary spending to be able to throw around in this uncertainty. So that's not the only quote that I've heard. Stonemaier Games have a quote on their blog. The blog article is called "The Darkest Timeline." So you already get a feeling of how they feel. Quote, "Manufacturing the types of games we make is not an option in the US. The reality of a 54% tariff is devastating. There is no math that makes it work. There is no silver lining. This is a lose-lose-lose situation for everyone involved except for the US government," which they then go on to note it's not good for the US government if it's bad for the citizens of that country. There's a lot of that
that's how it's supposed to work. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is thank goodness for D&D Beyond. so we can do everything digitally, even if the minis are unpainted. And we can avoid this tariff stuff. Right, Teos?
See, there was a tariff on digital paint, so the minis had to come unpainted, James. Because
Exactly.
what was, you can see.
Just doing a quick whip around. EN World had an article where they were taking kind of statements from different RPG companies, which is where I'm drawing some of this from, some of those linked to other blog articles. I don't intend to talk on behalf of any of these companies. This is just what their statements were at the time of recording. Cobalt Press, Chaosium, and Daggerwood Games, which are a small Australian RPG company, have expressed that regrettably they'll likely need to raise prices to at least some degree on some of their projects. You can see details in the blogs of those respective companies. I think Daggerwood Games was saying they want to try to split, so they'll absorb as much of the tariff cost into themselves as possible. And then, whatever's left over, they'll need to raise their prices to cover to remain functional.
Mm-hmm.
Evil Baby Entertainment, who have, I believe, a Kickstarter at the moment, Broken Empires, and Arcane Library, who have Shadow Dark up at the moment, have both said they'll absorb the tariff costs entirely themselves. At no small amount of financial pain, Evil Baby Entertainment was expressing. So, that's good. I wish those companies the best of luck with that strategy. Likely the costs across all industries in the US are going to be negatively impacted. This is, as I said before, sorry, I'm just reading my show notes, and discretionary spending for gamers will go down. Anyway, if you're a listener of the Eldritch Lorecast right now, you're a gamer, you love tabletop RPGs, what is your message to those folks? What would you be feeling right now? What would you want to be feeling? What could you do, if anything, about this? What would your thoughts be for people listening in terms of not feeling like they're just completely ships in a storm?
It's time for revolution. That was comedy. That was comedy, please note.
Yes, note, we laughed. We laughed at the comedy.
You hear
Not
that,
sedition.
FCC? That was comedy. I wrote my representative today, who is a toady of a certain U.S. president, and I asked him what he was doing to offset this completely tanking of the stock market because of these tariffs. And so I will see, I'm sure I will get a response of, this will all turn out well. This is a tactic that our government's using to try to negotiate better deals with countries. And in the meantime, people continue to suffer.
Yeah. Likewise, my state senator, Mariah Cantwell, is raising a bill in the Senate to return power over tariffs to the legislative branch in one way or another. And, hopefully there will be a little bit more, and I don't usually say this, a little bit more bureaucracy involved in decisions like this in the future. I do not say that lightly, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of monsters, let's take a little time off here. Let us, take off our economist jackets, relax a little bit. That's the news for the week, for better or worse. Probably worse, but who knows? I'm not going to try sling this on the back of my chair. It's time for some listener emails.
Yeehaw.
Teos, where would folks email if they wanted to reach the Eldritch Lorecast?
That is Shawn.Merwin at secretemail.com. No, I think it's Ghostfire Gaming. Oh,
you're close.
God, it's normally in my head because I listen to this every day as I'm on a treadmill, but now I can't remember.
Every day? You repeat episodes. That's
no,
impressive.
Oh, sorry. Every week. Every Monday.
Oh, okay.
It is podcast at ghostfiregaming.com. I looked.
That's the one. It's
also called our YouTube comments section for real spicy folks out there.
Yeah.
Ooh, if you're feeling particularly spicy. Anyway, John emailed to ask the question about creating new monsters. They are in the process of designing a long campaign and want to design a series of ever-increasing golems. What's the best guidance for creating a monster from scratch and estimating the CR? And with one of the contributors to Forge of Foes, Teos, I thought you were excellently positioned to answer this question.
My copy's right over there. I also put together a blog post. I'll plug away at alphastream.org. You can find, I basically tried to recreate what 2014's DMG gave us, which is a true how to build a monster section. And so I ported that out over with the help of a lot of smart people who understand math better than I do, and my labors of spreadsheets to really break down like what should a monster be at each CR. And so you can look at that. But there are a lot of ways to answer this question, and I would bet that my co-hosts feel this way as well. Like when you're running a thing for your home game, you can really just take even a little bit, right? Take that CR line that's on my website or in the old 2014 rules will work pretty well too, and just improvise the rest is one approach that's completely legitimate, right? Or you could really laboriously go through all the steps as if it was for publication and everything in between to make it, depending on kind of what you like. If you have Forge of Foes, you can use like ready to build stat blocks that are like a starting point for each CR. And then you can add monster powers that are pretty cool too.
The current American administration would like me to tell you to plug it into Grok, the AI companion of X, the social media.
I wondered where that was going.
Oh,
No.
It's like,
Put a tariff on that.
James, were you sleeping on the last 3 minutes? Like, we've changed topic.
I like how his machine tried to blur him out.
Yeah. It's sort of a...
Please do not talk about Grok. I am embarrassed.
I would say Teos is right on the money with this one. If you are not beholden to, the strict balancing requirements of a published product, why would you put yourself through that? I mean, like, there is no time for playtesting. Your group is going to get it once and never again. Are you really going to spend an hour or 2 or 3 working on a monster that your players are going to, maybe spend that long or less fighting and then never use again? Unless it's fun, right? If building monsters is fun, if it's a way for you to engage your DMing brain and have what we in the biz call lonely fun, then do it. I mean, it's your time. Do whatever you want with it. It could be pretty cool to design a monster to exacting standards and use the language of game design to create a sort of ludo-narrative harmony where mechanics influence story and all of that stuff. The stuff we try to do when we build a published adventure. Because we don't know who you are. We just want to make the best system to support you systemically as we can. However, you as the GM of your home game have the luxury of fiat and the ability to kind of wing it and adjust things on the fly based on whatever the flow of the game is. So do it one way or another. Just do what's fun.
There is nothing stopping you from taking an ogre stat block if you need a CR4 monster and making the ogre a golem. And you change the flavor, maybe adjust a number up or down, and but slightly give it some sort of resistance to whatever golems might be resistant to. In your case, steel or clay or rope or beer, whatever your golem is made of, and you have a perfectly cromulent CR4 monster just waiting to be unleashed on your players.
Now,
it's a tariff golem, and every time it hits you, one of your items becomes unaffordably expensive. You can't wear your armor; it's too expensive.
You have to sell it.
The tax golem,
Right
you just
then.
lose gold every time.
Now, I want to try and approach this question on its own terms, though, right? We've given our answer. Now, if we want to actually answer the question in the way that the emailer wants us to, how would we go about doing that anyway? What resources are available for a GM who wants to do that?
So you could do ever-increasing golems by thinking through the narrative story of what is increasing, right? So what is baby golem? What is end golem? I just watched Electric State, where there was like, a robot inside a robot inside a robot, which is a superb idea. I've done things like I've had a golem where like the out of layer was adamantine, and then you tore through and eventually you got to like, the wooden inside, right? And that can be a lot of fun. But you could do that across golems, right? Whatever the story is of these golems in your campaign, whatever cool things going on, then they can ratchet up based on that. And depending on that fiction, you could validate why they are that particular CR. And then CR tends to have a band of statistics behind it, right? As you go up in CR, your hit points go up, your armor class goes up, your damage goes up. There is a greater chance that they will be legendary. If you want it to be legendary, that starts making more sense. And then they get a bonus to damage for that. And the easiest way to do that is just look at other monsters. And like Shawn said, you can say like my CR4 golem is kind of like an ogre because it's big and hits hard. But then maybe you give it some golem-y features on top of it, stolen from whatever monsters you like, and give them the same math, right? Either because you look at my blog or because you take the 2014 DMG row, but you apply that same thing. So you might steal, maybe there's a monster that's like CR1 and it has some really cool ability you like, but it's, +3 to attack and it deals 6 damage. We'll just change that to be what it should be for your CR so that those ever increasing golems have properly scaled features from wherever you stole them. And a great place to steal them is the Ghostfire products. Those are really cool monsters.
I'm going to give a Mackenzie de Armas answer. I say this because Mackenzie did a series of monsters based on the periodic table of elements. And so what's that hardness scale for
Mohs?
So the Mohs scale of hardness, right? So you take the Mohs scale of hardness and you make a golem for each thing in that scale, starting with probably talc.
Mica.
Right?
A mica
golem. A mica golem, and then you work your way up. And so the mica golem is CR1/2. And so you look at what mica or talc or whatever the softest is, and you give it some traits. It's brittle, right? So it will crack the first time you hit it, reducing its armor class by 4. So you do start doing fun things like that, using something as a touchstone, no pun intended, for that scale. So you're going to get some fun ideas. You are going to have the numbers in front of you looking at other monsters that you can build from. And you are on your way to a whole set of monsters that are fun and easily publishable, I might add.
Yeah. And that fiction is super critical, right? Where you say, okay, like, this thing is going to, like, if it was like a talc, right, then it's going to break into this powdery white stuff when you hit it. And maybe that creates like a little cloud around it, right?
Right.
That just partially
choking.
Yeah, it might choke you. It could be
cloud.
obscuring. Yeah. And as you get up harder to that, you could come up with maybe it's creating sparks when you hit it and you're in a flammable room, right? And so that would be perfect.
Right.
How hard do you want to hit this thing when you might light the room on fire? There's a chance with every blow, that could be fun.
I mean, those super flavorful features are what really excite me about monsters as a GM. And that was, similar to what James was saying earlier around like having alone fun or solo fun or whatever as a GM. Creating monsters in depth is what really makes me enjoy monster design and GMing more so than just the math. And one of the ways that I love doing that, honestly, is playing video games, seeing a monster in a video game and being like, oh, that's a cool ability. How would that work if I adapted that as a rule into 5th edition? One of my favorites that I've made was in God of War. There's these golems that are made of the earth. I think they're called ancients or something, but basically they're very hard to do any damage to, but their chest opens, the rocks kind of all slide to the side, and they shoot a beam out of the center of their chest, and that's the moment you need to throw the axe to hit the center of them to do the most damage. I was like, all right, how do we create this as a monster? What I created was fundamentally an earth elemental, but it had like a sort of breath weapon style attack where its chest opened. If you attacked it on your turn, you'd do however much damage. But if you held your attack and waited for it on its turn to do its breath weapon and then attacked as a reaction, its AC would be lower and you would automatically crit it.
Cool.
And the players figuring that out through description is one of the just best feelings, not only because it feels satisfying as a designer, but it also feels like they are fighting that thing. That thing has an ability. It's what I think Cobalt Press monsters, particularly in Tomophos and the Creature Codex, are really good at doing, is creating monsters that feel like the thing that the lore describes as opposed to just a series of numbers. through unique flavorable features.
I want to build on that because I agree. That's the type of monster design I really like. Because it involves thinking of the monster in the context of its existence, the context of the world, and almost treating the monster as a puzzle in addition to a combat victory.
The Death Star exhaust port, as
right,
one of the earliest episodes of the Lorecast talked about.
Yeah. I mean, all of my favorite action video games are about, finding the weak point on the creature and then finding a way to exploit it. And one thing that I've learned from studying these video games is that you need to be very careful to teach the players in subtle ways how to look for that sort of thing. You can do it through repetition, right? They struggle and struggle and struggle against one creature, and then they figure out, oh, it's got a weak point. And then they start looking for the weak point in other monsters you do. And that involves a lot of friction right up front. You throw a boss with no explanation, and it's like, oh, you had to learn how to use readied actions in order to beat it. And they're like, we haven't used readied attacks ever in this campaign, right? That's a bit of a hard sell. But if they use readied attacks all the time, right, you as their DM know that you don't have to teach them that. They might kind of do it accidentally and all of a sudden realize, oh crap, I did 50 damage in that attack. What did I do different? What happened? But if the puzzle is something obscure, right, like it's got to be a particular, a creature that needs water dumped on it, right? It's like a burning, those creatures from the Elden Ring DLC, the big walking pyres, they're this huge like brazier that's burning all on top of them. That's obvious that you can deal a lot of damage by dropping water on it. If they're not just, playing with attack rolls and spells, if they're using the environment around them. If you can give more tricky than that with elemental weaknesses that aren't as obvious as a giant burning beacon in their head, with something like what about a poison slime, right? What if you were to cast purify food and drink upon it that would remove all the poison from it? You got to find ways to seed this idea, right, and not just be like, oh well, they'll have to cast purify food and drink on this, and if they didn't prepare that spell, well, too bad for them. No, think about a way to get that idea in their head at the beginning of the session, well before they ever need to use it in actuality.
There's a Dark Sun novel where Rikus is in this ancient ruin, and there is this shadow creature that's coming after him, and he can, see glimpses of it with the light that's there, and everything he tries fails against it. And then he thinks, well, it is shadow, and it seems to somewhat be interplaying with this light, and he just hopes he's right, and he extinguishes his light source, a torch probably, and that defeats it, right? Like it must have a light source in order to be shadow, and it's a big gamble, right? But it's great to oh, that was cool, it's a neat weakness.
What y'all are talking about is great for a home game. If you're going to be publishing it, you have to be very, very careful because the DM running it is not you. So that's where the play testing comes in. That's where can this thing be defeated without knowing the trick? Because not every DM is going to be proficient at delivering the clues that will lead to that. So that's where design, some user experience comes into play.
Was it you, Shawn, that wrote we had that D&D Open where there was a special table, and we kind of did a thing where, we knew that some people would go faster than others. Some tables would be super great. And so we gave them the benefit of going off and doing a special mission, which mechanically
the whole point Perkins.
of it, the whole point of it was to slow everybody down, right? The best player, the best tables that are just churning through everything. Well, now they've got to do an extra thing. And this one had a kind of puzzle to it that you were told up front. And then you faced something that was not of any great consequence. When you killed it, something else showed up. And you would sort of realize they were getting stronger. And a lot of tables that faced that, or a few of the tables that faced that, thought to themselves, wait a minute, this is getting harder. What was that thing we heard at the beginning again? And the DM repeats it. And the key was stop it. Nobody attack for an entire round, right? But there was one table that were particularly optimized and brilliant at dealing damage. and they could not believe that there was any solution to this other than killing every single thing and going on to the next.
And they were like an 8th level table that were killing Solars, but by the end, and they were so very proud. But they ended up not being able to finish the full adventure because they never quite picked up on this clue that's literally told you, don't attack. And they just couldn't believe that such a thing could happen.
That's very clever. I've been playing in my head with a monster idea based on what's his name? I can't remember the character's name, but he's in the season 3 of Invincible. He's like an electric guy who, when you hit him, it charges him up, like friction and kind of impact charge him. And it made me think like, oh, what if there's like some sort of golem, like lightning themed monster that like when you hit it with a bludgeoning, piercing or slashing weapon, it does damage, but its attacks get stronger each turn that it gets hit with one of those damage types. So I love little flavorful things.
There was a 3rd edition monster that it was a type of devil, like a Jozak, or I can't remember what its exact name was, but it would regenerate at the start of its turn, and I think it regenerated 5 damage, and it dealt 3 with its claws. And so there was an encounter where they were like 3 rooms away, and you start just taking damage and you don't know why. And eventually you come into the room, and everybody in the party is doing this, and they're just trading blows, right? I get you, you get me. Everybody takes 6 damage, but they're healing their own 3 back, so they're not hurt. And so what will often happen is, the most powerful DPS character goes up there and hits that thing. And what they do is they reflect the damage they've taken in a radius. So everybody in the party takes the damage that the most powerful character just inflicted on them. And so you've got to figure this out, because you cannot have your strongest hitter take these guys down, because it's going to, kill people. And some tables are very bad at that.
Well, speaking of taking our strongest guys down, these strongest folks are going to get out of here because it is the end of the episode. If you want to join us live, you can join us live on Twitch at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on a Monday. That is the time going forward. 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday. Teos, if folks want to keep up with what you're doing, if they want to hear more of your wisdom, where would they go?
Podcast at Ghost Game. No, alphastream.org is where you can find all my stuff. From there, you'll get everything, and listen to us at the number like 15 to 97 podcasts in the world is Mastering Dungeons, and so you can check us out there as well.
Definitely subscribe to the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel or any other podcast platform alongside the Eldritch Lorecast YouTube channel or podcast platform. Likes and thumbs and stars and stuff. We both crave them all, so give them to us. They're like paying the Lorecast tariff is we a 1 thumb tariff is what. Anyway, let's all forget about that. It's time to go. I've been Ben Byrne here with James Haig, Shawn Merwin, Teos Abadir, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Very polite.